writing down my character defects. And I do that with the women I sponsor. I don't really have any problem letting them know the character defects that I see. And I think that that's what we need to do, is help each other. And if because I'll ask when we're doing this, said, what character defect do you see there as we're going through the fifth, as we're doing the fifth step? And so what happens is, oh, okay. I'm seeking what is sneaking around back here. So what happens is when we get through with the fifth step, then I like to do a little exercise with the sixth step. What I like to do is just take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle of it. And on one side of it is the character defect. And whatever that character defect is, dishonesty. And then on the other side, we want to put, what is the opposite of that? Honesty. And just kind of write down the character defects. And this is going to be kind of, what I want to do is list what I'm going to strive for. Now, I'm going to talk about the character defects that have plagued me and that were especially when I first got sober, and continue to plague me throughout a lot of my sobriety. One of the character defects was jealousy. I was very, very jealous. And when Dave and I married, I became more jealous. Well, the opposite of jealous is I've got to trust. I've got to trust what's going on. And I was jealous. And what happened is I thought, I think Dave's the greatest guy on earth. And I'm a person who's always been blessed to have a lot of beautiful, young, thin sponsees. And they adore Dave, and Dave adores them. And that has caused me jealousy throughout the years. And I could put that at bay, I could pray about it, and I would be relieved of that jealousy. And boy, just out of nowhere, something would happen, and here it would just creep in again. And I'm telling you that the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous even talks about that it is absolutely, the worst character defect is jealousy. It rots the soul. I mean, I believe people are murdered for jealousy. That is how bad that character defect is. That character defect will cause somebody to murder another human being. It is so absolutely the worst character defect. Now, I don't have so much trouble with it today, but Dave's 77. So I'm 72. So it's not a big deal. So more or less time has kind of taken that away for today. And it doesn't bother me so much, but I can tell you that was one that gave me a lot of problems throughout my life and throughout my sobriety. Another one was intolerance. And I'll tell you, today at lunch, I experienced that character defect again today. The waitress, I was just becoming so intolerant at our meal, and Bob ended up not even having time. They didn't even bring him the right food. And I was going to, I wanted to go fight his battle. I was getting so intolerant about it all. And then Patrick's didn't even come. And then it was like cold when it got here. And I wanted to go say something. I'm telling you, it was all I could do not to say something. Yet I was making enough, statements at the table, because I am very intolerant. And the book talks about intolerance and how our intolerance can drive people away from Alcoholics Anonymous when otherwise their lives could have been saved. That's a pretty bad character defect. Now, maybe that character defect isn't at its worst at a restaurant when I am intolerant of a waitress who appears to be waiting on everybody else but me and us and the people I'm with. And that's the way it appeared to me. But it can be very bad if we're in an AA group and there's somebody in our group that's having problems, and maybe I'm doing a judgment and I'm intolerant about what's going on with them, and they leave and go drink and die. Then we're talking about serious intolerance as a character defect. I have a character defect that the big book talks about as a character defect. A lot of times we don't see it as a character defect, and I believe that character defect is depression. And to be depressed is to live out of self, because I believe when I'm truly in self, I'm depressed. Now, I know that there's a lot of levels, and there's clinical depression and all of the stuff that we talk about. I don't know about any of those. I only know about the depression that I suffer. And when I have that depression, I am totally and completely in self. And that character defect has absolutely nearly destroyed me. And when I sponsor somebody, and it's amazing, we attract what we are. It seems like I just attract women who have depression. And I'll tell you, depression is a downer. It is not fun. And one of the things that I try to do with some of the things that were taught to me, because, by the time when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was on so much medication because of depression. And today, what I do is what Bob was talking about. And I love what Bill says in his story. Bill says, I was to know usefulness. And that experience has been good for me, to have had depression. Because first of all, there are people who don't understand depression. They get very impatient, which is another character defect, intolerance, impatience, that they get very intolerant of people who have depression, especially if you don't understand it. And one of the things that was told to me is, don't talk about yourself. Call somebody on the phone, call X number of people, and if they ask about you, change the subject. Don't talk about yourself. Talk about somebody else. Be willing. This book talks about constant thoughts of others to people like us. Constant thoughts of others. And when I'm depressed, I am totally and completely into self, because all I'm thinking about is self. And what I need to do is do something to get out of self. And I don't know how to do that except work with another alcoholic. Get on the phone, call somebody, go see if you can give them a ride. Do something to get out of myself. But the hardest thing is pick up the 200-pound phone and call somebody and ask if you can help them. Another character defect that I find and I have, and that it's very, very harmful, is gossip. And don't do it. Say nice things about something. Remember that saying when we were a little kid, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all? Well, I can't imagine anywhere that it applies more than in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because what happens is, I am subject to gossip. And let me tell you, the thing about it is, I have really had to work on this character defect because I get a charge out of it. I love to talk about people. I love to call up somebody and want to know what's going on. What's going on in Southern California since I've been gone? Blah, 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 blah. And what happens is the next thing I know, I feel like I'm all caught up in the gossip. And what do I have to do about gossip? Not participate in it. And when somebody starts gossiping, I try not to participate in it. For the first time, a long time ago, Bob had invited me to speak at his group in Las Vegas. That's when it wasn't Connect the Dots. And I was there, and one of the things that he said, we were talking about a friend who we had heard who had relapsed. And I remember you using the term, we can't kick our wounded. Pardon me? Shoot our wounded. We can't shoot our wounded. And my gosh, I just keep thinking about that. Because usually if we've got something to gossip about somebody, they're in trouble. And they don't need our gossip. They need our help. And they need us to care about them and see what we can do instead of talking about them. Mm-hmm. And I think about that so many times when, after Bob had said that, when I hear somebody gossip. And what I've learned to do today is when somebody starts doing that and it's really hard and sometimes it really takes a lot of prayer. The best thing for me to do is say, I'm just really sorry I can't participate in that. But sometimes I'm not that well, and I just have to do something to just change the subject or say, I'm sorry, I need to go, or something like that. But what I really should be doing is putting an end to the gossip, because it's harmful. It will harm other people for me to gossip. I believe steps 6 and 7 are when we really start to pray, is when we really start to pray. Because the thing about it is the only way I can get rid of these character defects, I can write that other side of that list, and I can know what I need to do, and I can strive for that, and I can do the best I can to not participate in these character defects, but to remove them and to relieve me of it, only God can do it. And what I like to think about is the farmer. There was the farmer was standing by his farm, with a hoe, and the priest is walking down the street, and the priest looks at the farmer and he says, "Oh my goodness, look at the beautiful farm God gave you." And the farmer said, "Yes, and you should have seen it when only God had it." So what that tells me is it's going to require some effort on my part. It's going to require maybe to be uncomfortable. We're talking about, when he was talking about smoking cigarettes. I had such a bad cigarette smoking habit that I could hardly lay down at night because I had so much congestion from smoking cigarettes. And what I did is I began to pray and ask God to help me to be willing to quit smoking and to help me to be willing to face the detox of stopping smoking. Because I knew I'd stopped drinking, and it seemed to me like, I thought alcohol, to stop drinking was the hardest thing ever. I didn't think I could ever stop smoking. I just absolutely did not think I could ever stop smoking. I didn't know what would I do with myself. I would just be this living person full of agitation. What do you do when you don't smoke? I smoke after I eat. I smoke on the phone. I smoke while driving. It's like all the time I'm smoking. How do I get rid of smoking? And I just prayed to be willing. Was it uncomfortable when I quit smoking? Yes. But what would happen is I just had to keep praying for God's help minute by minute by minute to not smoke. Don't smoke. Don't smoke a cigarette. And by God's grace, today, by God's grace, that phenomenon of craving has been removed. And for that, I am so grateful. God stories with having faith, asking God for help. I think that's what we constantly have to do with character defects, because that's the only way is the prayer. And I want to share a little story. Last year, about a year and a half now, because it was in the summer, I sponsor a woman in Chicago. And she has a little girl that has mild autism. And this is an adopted child, and she has another child that she has also adopted, and this child doesn't seem to have anything with her. But what happened, because she had mild autism, she had been accepted into a school that was about 30 minutes from her, that she would have to take her child to the school. Well, we're sitting at her house, and she says, but right there, not even a block away, she says, is a school. But in Chicago, they have what's called lottery schools. And even though you live right next to the school, you might not can get into the school. But if her oldest child could get into the school, then her youngest child would automatically be accepted into the school, and the school was just paces away, and it was the 5th rated school in Cook County, which was an amazing school. So what happened was, and she said, I've got Lila accepted into this school, and I'm 16th on the list for the other school. Now it is August, the latter part of August. And I mean, it's going to be pretty soon, this whole thing is going to be over with. I've learned to trust prayer from the 6th and 7th step. And as we're walking outside to walk Lila to her kindergarten, she says, that's the school right there that I just wish that the girls could get in so bad. And I just grabbed her hand, and I just said a prayer. I just said, God, getting Lila into this school is not a big deal for you, but this would absolutely mean everything to Tricia and Carter to have Lila and Ray in this school. And when we just continued to walk to the kindergarten, and to drop Lila off. And then we came back, and as we're standing in front of the school, Tricia's phone rings. And on the other end of the phone is that school calling to say that Tricia has been accepted to that school. And she's standing there, and she's going, oh my God, I'm standing in front of the school right now. And the principal says, well, as long as you're standing there, why don't you just come on over and register her? And when she gets there, she says, well, you need to know that Lila has this mild autism. And she has been a challenge to the people in the kindergarten. And she says, not to worry. We have the best special needs curriculum in Cook County right here. That took God 20 minutes to answer that prayer. And that's just prayers of many things. A lot of times my God's much slower than that. I call him an 11th hour God. Just when the claw marks are just, not going to last any longer, he sweeps in and comes through. But step 6 and 7 is where that prayer began to happen. Because nothing is going to help. I have a sponsee that's got a lot of problem with rage. And she keeps saying, what can I do about it? What can I do about it? And I says, what you want is to be free of anger. That's what we're ultimately going here for. But we have to constantly pray about it. And my God, it seems to work in that he gives me opportunities to grow. He gives me situations in which I have to practice things. I believe that he's totally capable of lifting it right out. I just sometimes don't believe God works that way, that he just gives us opportunities. One of the things that I had a hard time with when I was growing up, it seemed like the message I got, is if you ever thought well of yourself, then you were called conceited. And so consequently, I didn't think that it was, I've always had all kinds of mixed up stuff about, you need to think well of yourself. And I can remember Dottie telling me, it's not that you think well of yourself, it's just you think only of yourself. And it was just that self-centered. And what I've learned today is, and I learned this, Dr. Paul was the one who first talked about it, but I heard it from a friend of mine, and she even ended up writing a book about it, where if you want to have self-esteem, you have to do esteemable acts. If I want to feel good about myself, I can tell you, me sitting and thinking about it won't do it. I absolutely cannot. I can't even, talks about love yourself. I don't know anything about loving myself. I've never been able to come up with those kind of feelings. All I know is that when I do something for somebody else, and I was just how Bob was talking about how that felt for him, is when I do something for somebody else is how good I feel about that. And I can tell you, sometimes when I've got a woman coming over to my house ready to do a fifth step, I wish I was so spiritual that before she got there, I was saying, oh God, thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to give up the next 5 hours of my life where I can listen to this fifth step. That is not how I feel. I don't feel like that. I'm just like, oh, I've got to listen to this fifth step. And I'm telling you, they're all of them the same and all of that. But all I can say is that something happens during that process. And that selfish, self-centered feeling I had when I was thinking about sacrificing my next 5 hours goes away. And something magical takes place. It is absolutely magical. And how I feel about that. And all I really was, I didn't do anything. I just listened. All I was with this was the conduit. It was her and God doing the work. And what I got to do was be the observer and watch and be able to participate. And somewhere out of wherever, I was able to say some character defects that just came to me. And sometimes I don't know if you're working with somebody and all of a sudden you say something and it's like, oh my God, where did that come from? Did I say that? Where did that come from? I'm not capable of saying that. I don't have enough smarts or anything else to say something like that. But what happens is what I look like when it talks about in the 12 and 12 about step 6 separates the men from the boys, and I like to say the women from the girls, this is the step where I really began to see how prayer works. And I begin to see that there is improvement in me. All these things that used to have me so uptight and stressed out and fearful, the pains in my chest and the throbbings in my head, and all of these things that used to just keep me all jacked up and tight as Frank Honeycutt used to say, as Dick's hat band. He said, I'm just as tight as Dick's hat band. And the thing about it is that by prayer and by asking God to remove these, I begin to feel relief. And sometimes the only relief I get is the way I get the relief, is some sponsee calling me and I share with them what I need to hear. And by me telling them what I need to say to them, I get to hear myself. Just like if I sit in the meeting, and if you're willing to participate in your own sobriety and share, you may be there to save my life. Because by you sharing helps me learn a little bit more about myself. Big steps, 6 and 7. We only get 2 paragraphs in the big book, but they're huge steps, because I truly believe what Chuck Chamberlain said, that what separates me from God is the things that in me that need removing, such as my character defects. And the more character defects that are removed from me and that I'm willing to have removed, the closer I get to God. And for me, those 2 steps are about prayer. Bob.
Thanks, Paula. Often, one of the problems seems to be that my vision of God is too small, and my vision of my fears are too big. One of the great blessings of alcoholism, it talks about it on page 53. It says, when you're alcoholic, you're crushed by these self-imposed crises you cannot postpone or evade. And then it brings me to a place that it says where we had to fearlessly face the proposition that God is either everything or else he's nothing. He either is or he isn't. And then I'm given a choice. What's my choice to be? One of my favorite stories of creation is from the Hindus. It's called Maya. Maya translates into the English as the Great Illusion or the Great Hallucination. And their story of creation, very different from the Judeo-Christian story of creation, is that God existed timelessly, all to himself. And he decided to create a cosmic game. And the cosmic game was that he would break himself into an infinite number of pieces and give each piece amnesia. And the game was which pieces will awaken, or to what the Hindus call enlightenment, to realize that they're not separate. It's a hallucination. They are one with all. That there is no separation. And the book says God's either everything or he's nothing. And sometimes my idea of God's very, very small. He's not big enough to help me. So I don't put the effort in because I don't trust him enough. I have a DVD at home of a scientist from Japan who giving a lecture with a translator. It's Dr. Emoto. And Dr. Emoto was a very astute scientist, and he did these experiments with water. And he got this water from one of the sacred glaciers in Japan. This water is very pure that comes off this glacier. And he put it into 1-liter bottles. And he would take these bottles and he would tape these little Japanese prayers of love and adoration on the side of the bottles. And he would pray these prayers of love over this one particular batch of water. And then he would take some of the water and flash freeze it with nitrogen until it crystallized quick. And then he'd put those crystals under an electron microscope and he would photograph them. And the ones where he would radiate love and prayers of love to the water, the crystals were spectacular. They were spiritual. They were beautiful. I mean, I see the pictures of them were remarkable. And then he took the same bit of water from the same glacier, only this batch of it, he cursed it. And he screamed and yelled at it. And I hate you. And I despise you. And all these curses. And he put curses on the bottle. And then he flash freezed it and filmed under an electron microscope the crystals. And they were hideous. They looked like something out of a bad Tim Burton movie. They were ugly and they looked evil. And then he says, if my thoughts are my prayers and my thoughts can do that to water, and I'm 85 to 90% water, what do my thoughts do to me? What do my thoughts do to me? Do I trust God enough? Sometimes sometimes I think that I'm in a partnership to co-create my own heaven or hell. Chuck Chamberlain used to talk about this experience that he had. He was coming off a drunk, and he was sitting in this chair in his house, and he just felt despicable. And he was sitting in this house, and he was married to that woman, and he had to work at that place, and he had those kids, and he said he just felt like he was in hell. And years later, as a result of getting sober in Alcoholics Anonymous and working the steps, he found himself one day sitting in the same chair in the same house, married to the same woman, working at the same place with the same kids, and he had tears in his eyes of gratitude because he realized he was in heaven. And he said, "What changed? Maybe heaven's just a new pair of glasses." I heard a guy years ago say that AA could also stand for altered attitudes. And an attitude is something that pilots talk about. It is the angle of approach. You can, with a bad attitude, you run into the side of a mountain. With a good attitude, you hit the runway every single time. And I think Alcoholics Anonymous is realigning me with the natural flow of God's grace in my life, just so that I can go with the flow. And we're not going with the flow kind of people. I think most I think we're like the old analogy that I'm an ant on a log going down a river, imagining that I'm steering, right? I'm trying to yell at everybody, "Come on, let's go to this side, and now let's go to this," and I'm not steering anything. I'm not steering anything. It's an illusion. And one of the great things that has happened to me is I have moments. I wish I could do this all the time. I can't. But I have had moments where the illusion of separation between me and you and me and God, it goes. You know when I've had that the most? Is in moments in a fifth step, when all of a sudden the guy that's doing the fifth step, the veil lifts, and now he sees his mother and father the way God saw his mother and father. And they were not perfect, but he sees them the way God sees them. And you're in the presence of a connectedness where there's no separation between me and him and his parents, and him and God, and me and God. And the illusion that there's more than one of us here goes away. Einstein said that one time. He thought that was the great illusion of mankind, that there's more than one of us here. I think that's really true. If you listen to fifth steps, I don't know how many fifth steps it takes before you realize. Polly said it. It's the same thing. I haven't heard anything new in a fifth step in 30-some years. I hear one maybe once a month at least. I haven't heard anything new in a while. I'm hoping always, just something interesting, maybe, a pink pony and jumper cable, something. I mean, it's never like that. It's always the same. Scared, vacant, lost, separate from God, lost from himself, and lost from others, empty, vacant person, desperately going through life trying to make themselves better and consequently stepping on the toes of everyone around them in the process of trying to fix themselves and ruining their life. It's always the same. It's always the same story. It never changes. Because we're not different. And yet the ego tells us Clancy has a banner in his garage somebody gave him. He says it's the thing we could rally under. My case is different. That is the great illusion of the ego, is the separateness. I remember the loneliness of alcoholism. I remember knowing with every fiber in me that no one really understands me. I remember knowing that there was something horridly wrong with me that was not wrong with anybody else, and I didn't know what it was. The psychiatrist of years of therapy couldn't figure it out, but I knew there was something wrong with me. And I come to Alcoholics Anonymous and I am restored to a sense of oneness. And I'm not, my case is not different. That I am not unique. And there is something wrong with me, and it is not wrong. It's a great blessing. It's called alcoholism. It crushes me. And consequently, as a result of being crushed, I'm faced with a proposition that God is either everything or He's nothing. He either is or He isn't. And I get to open up and expand my vision of God. I think God gets bigger as I get smaller. And sometimes I get bigger and God gets smaller. That's a bad way to go. I've done that. That's a bad way to go. One of the problems I had with God is I secretly thought He had my job. I just met a guy at the noon meeting the other day. He said he was an atheist. I went up to him after the meeting. I said, I understand. If there was going to be a God, it should be me. And he just looked at me like, what am I? I don't know. That's why I don't like God. He's got my job. Got anything? Want to close the room?
Yeah, I think just ready to start.
We'll be come back for Clancy. Remember, if you're one of the first 10 rows, and then we'll be back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Is that right? 9 o'clock. Other people know more about what I'm doing than I do.
Yeah, no kidding. And we're going to meet.
Yesterday was a long day, but it was a good day. And what a great way to end the day with Clancy's talk about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, which kind of ties into what I want to share my experience with this morning, step 8 and 9. Clancy mentioned it in passing in the chronological order of what happened that formed AA. But you could kind of say, in a sense, that Alcoholics Anonymous might have been formed indirectly by one man's 8th step. That Dr. Bob, of all the things that Bill Wilson, all the ideas that Bill Wilson had presented to Dr. Bob, going out and seeking out the people he needed to face was the one he resisted the most. And he wouldn't do it. And consequently, he drank again. And it seemed to me that when you try to look, what's the difference between Mother's Day and June 10th? And the difference was the actions that Bob took, that he got out of that little surgery, which, just a little sidebar, I knew a guy named Bill Pittman and another guy, Frank Mauser, who'd searched the Akron Hospital and St. Thomas Hospital records trying to find out more about the patient that Dr. Bob, with his shakiness, operated on that morning. And Dr. Bob was a proctologist, and these guys couldn't find out anything about the patient. They couldn't find any information. They wanted to see what happened. You know, like, did he whistle when he walked or what? We don't know. I mean, the book just says he lived. And Dr. Bob got out of that surgery and disappeared and went out and sought everybody he was afraid to face. Consequently, never took another drink again the rest of his natural life, lived about 15 more years roughly, and as a result, I've heard people estimate that Dr. Bob personally helped 5,000 alcoholics. I don't know. Helped a lot. It was his way of life, and he instilled in them an ethic to help others. And I guess, in a sense, we're all here indirectly as a result of Dr. Bob's finally, as it says in the book, in the section on amends, becoming willing to go to any lengths. You know, and I think that my sense is that that's really what they're talking about in AA when they say willing to go to any lengths. I think it's been twisted over the years, some of it coming out of treatment centers from well-intentioned people trying to get people not to drink, telling them it almost as if it means today in some circles that willing to go to any lengths is willing to try not to drink and go to a meeting, which is great, but I think it's meant more than that. I understand Dr. Bob's fear of making the amends. I was terrified by it. There's nothing in Alcoholics Anonymous that would spin me in a depressive mood and fill me more full of fear than the prospect of making amends. And it wasn't that I was against it, the idea. Intellectually, I understood the value in it. It was just too big for me. I could see the people in AA, you should make amends, and you probably padded your expense account, and good, go make that right. You'll get some character. But I did some hard things. I rolled on some people to save myself from going to jail. I'd stabbed a guy who I've never found to this day. He was in Maine. And I've never found him. And I did a little time over that and got released because he wouldn't press charges. And I've never been able to track him down, and I have looked. I owed so much money. I remember sitting in a meeting one time, and this guy was like real self-righteous about, he says that I pay back all the money I've ever taken from anybody. And I was sitting there going, oh, crap. I was like, oh my God. It was like, I wanted to shoot myself. This is impossible. I lived a way of life. I mean, I'm not a gangster. I did fancy myself one time until the police said I was a public nuisance instead. But what I was a pathetic, petty guy. I often, as a way of life, I would be in a bar drinking and I'd run out of money. So when you went to the bathroom, I would steal your change and drink your drink and then move to a different part of the bar, and I'd get caught intermittently, and I'd get thrown out of places. And I would, if you're a woman and you left your purse somewhere, I'd snatch it. It's not personal. I used to go up and down the streets, and if cars were unlocked, I'd steal your 8-track player, which dates me, your 8-track player, because I could sell it, get a few bucks for it. It was just a way of life. I did something. God, I've never cleaned all this up. I can't imagine I ever will. I used to do this as a way of life. I had a terrible nicotine addiction, and every single day, usually twice a day at least, I would go into a bar or a restaurant, a gas station, and I looked horrid with long, dirty hair, and you know how we look in the streets, and I would pretend to put money in the cigarette machine and then go crazy banging on it and yelling, it's ripped me off, and I'd do that until the manager would come and open the machine and give me a pack of cigarettes just to get rid of me. And I did that probably almost twice a day for a long time. And people are saying, pay back all the money. I was like, oh my God. I remember sitting thinking one time, if I ever got a good job and I worked for 50 more years, I don't think I will make enough money in my lifetime to pay the debt. It was overwhelming. And yet, Alcoholics Anonymous seems to function on a principle that Carl Jung used to talk about, the principle of synchronicity. And synchronicity is, I guess, it's one way to intellectually look at what some people would consider the hand of God. A synchronistic universe is a universe that provides opportunity. A universe that if you need to get from point A to point B and you can't, and it's not self-serving, it's really what you need to do. From the moment of desire, often the universe will start slowly shifting until what was impossible eventually becomes an eventuality. And you don't have to sit in many meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous to hear the stories of that. The people that had restraining orders and couldn't see their kids, and then 3 years sober, they got their kids at a meeting with them. the people who I sponsor probably 20 people that I've watched the most amazing thing in their lives. These are people that had been entrenched in the mental health system for years. I mean, when I met them, they were so medicated that I don't think I could ever reach these people. And now, years later, they're off of everything, and they're not just off of everything. They're the guys that laugh the loudest, and they sponsor people. I mean, there's a freedom there. That is beyond human aid. That is unbelievable. Whatever this power is that most people call God, I guess, and that works through Alcoholics Anonymous, just does amazing things. And I had a couple of men's that were very hard. One of the hardest ones was to my mother and father, because my mother and father loved me. I used to try to blame them for stuff, but the real truth they never did anything to mistreat me. Now, they weren't perfect, and I used to try to blame stuff on them. Well, they never really understood me, or they were too smothering, or they tried to do too much for me, and they spoiled me. It's hard when someone loves you to make them out to be the bad guy. But I tried. But I could never really even sell that bill of goods to me, because I knew that my parents loved me, and my mother went to work just for money so I could go to school, and also for bail bondsmen and different things. And I punished them for their love. I didn't mean to, but I did. One of the worst things I did to my mother and father is I kept getting back up again. And I'd get their hopes up. And then 6 months later, I'd steal something from them, or I'd just disappoint them again, or I'd end up arrested again. And this is so bizarre. There was, in the town we lived in, Reading, Pennsylvania, there was only one pawn shop. My father became friends with the guy who owned the pawn shop from buying his own crap back. And then when they became friends, the guy cut me off, and he wouldn't take stuff from me anymore. And what happened is over years of that, they spent a fortune. I mean, literally a fortune on me. And over years of that, they eventually, to save their own mental health, their own sanity, they had to cut me out of their life. And they would have nothing to do with me. They would not take my phone calls. I remember the last time I called them. I was in jail in Western Pennsylvania, and I'd been arrested for a DUI. Hit and run, stolen car. It was borrowed, actually, but that's beside the point. And my dad he hung up on me. He said, you got yourself into this, you can just get yourself out, and he hung up. And boy, I hated him. This is so pathetic. I wrote him this horrid letter trying to I wanted out of jail bad. And I'm trying to guilt him into getting me out of jail. So I wrote him this letter. It was so pathetic. I just cringed when I got sober and thought about this. I wrote him this letter, and in the letter I said, it's all right. I understand I've disappointed you, and I'm not the son. I've tried to be the son you'd like, but there's something wrong with me, and it's okay. I'm not very lovable, and don't worry about me. I got raped by a bunch of guys here in jail, and I'm going to hang myself, and then I won't be a problem to you anymore. And they still wouldn't bail me out. Oh my God! And when I got sober, I thought about that letter. I wanted to shoot myself. Oh God! So I get sober, and this is hanging over me, and I'm trying to accept the situation as it is, because I knew I didn't have any sense of entitlement to having them in my life. I didn't have any illusion that they ought to forgive me. I didn't get that at all. I just thought it was over. It's too late. And people funny thing about Alcoholics Anonymous, if you get a sponsor in a home group, it's like people in AA start butting into your business. They start asking you questions like, oh, so where's your mom and dad? Oh, they're back in Pennsylvania. So when's the last time you talked to them? Oh, 3 years. Oh, well, you need to so you've never made amends to your mother and father. Well, yeah, I mean, but I can't. And I try to explain to him how it was too late. Like maybe a couple years before I broke that chair trying swinging it at my dad when he was confronting me about my drinking, and I flipped out on him. Or before I sold my mother's silver set, maybe back then, or maybe there was a time when I hadn't broken their hearts enough that I could make amends. But it's too late. They won't even talk to me. And people in AA, they listen, nod their heads, smile, and they didn't hear a word you said. They got this, well, here's what we want you to do. You didn't hear me. And they won't listen to me. And the first thing they told me, they said, we want you to call your mother and father. Call them every week. And I said to them, they won't take my calls. And they said something to me that was astounding. They said, don't call collect. Now, that would have never occurred to me. Isn't that bizarre that I'm that self-centered? I would never have thought of that. I have some kind of bizarre self-centered sense of entitlement. Of course, they're your parents. They got money. You call them collect, for God's sake. I never would. And I remember the first time I ever called, my mother answers the phone. And when she heard my voice, she got very uncomfortable. She got very uptight. She went, what do you want? And then her voice shifted in tone, and she said, oh, my God, you're not back in Pennsylvania again. I said, no, Mom, I'm in Nevada. I'm in Las Vegas. She said, you're in Las Vegas? Well, the operator didn't ask me to pay for the call. I said, no, Mom, I paid for the call. And her voice shot up an octave. She went, you paid for the call? Like she couldn't believe it. I mean, it was like... and then the wall came down, and she got off the phone. She didn't want to talk to me. And my feelings were hurt. And they told me to call every week, and I called every week, and this is not a family reunion. And there was a defendedness in her voice. But so when you think about it, that's what you get with someone who's really loved you, and you've broken their heart over and over again. I mean, that's what you get. I mean, objectively, if my mother and father would have welcomed me back easily, there would have been something wrong with their mental health and with the track record between us. And so I did. They told me in AA, they said, we know you got this pathetic little job. And I did. I was 5 years sober before I made $5 an hour. And all my jobs in early sobriety were between, I think minimum wage was probably $3.25 or $3.50 maybe. And I was making in $3.50 to $4.50 an hour, just living paycheck by check. And people in AA said, don't ever miss their birthday, Mother's Day, Father's Day, their anniversary or Christmas. You have to get them something. Even just a little thing. I remember the first Christmas. It was so pathetic. I didn't have much money, and I got my mom some little deal, and I got my dad this necktie. It was pathetic. It was like $8 or $9 necktie. And if I'd have got my dad a beach house in Hawaii, it wouldn't even touch how far behind I am with him. And I got to give him a necktie. I just felt like a loser. You know what I mean? Giving him this necktie. These people in AA, oh, this is good. Your dad will like that. And it's a nice looking tie. And, these Pollyanna people in AA. Jesus. And oddly enough, I sent my dad that necktie, and he called me. And for just a moment, the wall came down. Just a moment, then it went back up again. I kept at that. And when I was about a year sober, my mother and father decided to fly out to Las Vegas and eyeball me. And it was not a family reunion. They came out there, honest to God, they came out there with this attitude that he's probably still a bum and he's trying to con us and get back in our good graces. But, we've never been to Las Vegas, so it won't be a complete loss. And they came out there, honestly, with that attitude. No, this is not and I met him at the airport. I took him out to dinner with my first sponsor and his wife, who passed away many years ago, Gladys, and what a wonderful couple. And we're at I had never, I'm a down and out guy. I'd never been to a nice restaurant. When we got I didn't know what a nice restaurant cost. we got the bill, and I had to borrow money from my sponsor to pay for the bill. It was so much. And my first sponsor's idea was, why don't you invite them to your home group? And my home group was an open meeting that met in people's houses at that time. It was called the Floating Big Book, and it was his home group and the group of the people who brought the meetings into the detox I was in. And I joined their group, and it was a pretty cool group. There was a lot of camaraderie. People would come to the meeting sometimes an hour early and help set up, and it was one of those kind of groups where the old timers would make fun and goof on and laugh at the newer people, right? And my mother and father came to that meeting, and they got to see that camaraderie. And then I had a couple guys that were newer that I was trying to help, and I was picking on them and laughing at them because AA functions on the first rule of plumbing: crap runs downhill. And they got to see me with the guys that I ran with. I ran with a pack of guys that we were like AA crazy people. We just go from meeting to meeting. We did a lot of hospital and institution work. We just 12-step, because that was the big ethic in this group. It was not a big book, even though it was a big book study. Nobody studied the book. I'd read a couple paragraphs and talk about their day or something, or their drunk luck. But it was a big group about making amends and helping others. Big service group, and saved my life. And my mom and dad came to that meeting, and they got to see me with you. And, oh my God, I'm never better. They got to see me, Bob, at his best when I'm with you. I remember watching my mom and dad. They'd laugh at some of the crazy stuff we say. We say funny stuff. Sometimes we don't even know it's funny. I remember watching my mother. There was someone there talking about getting their kids back, and my mom started to tear up. I remember she leaned over to my dad and she said something like, "This is very good." And I don't know that my dad, he died when I was about a little over 5 years sober, close to 6 years, I guess. And I don't know that he ever really understood AA, but he liked what he saw in me. And my mom lived 17 till I was 17 years sober, and I got to become very close to her, which is another story. But when they were getting ready to leave to go back to Pennsylvania, I was instructed to make on paper everything that I believed I owed my father, and then ask him if there's anything else, and to propose a payment plan. And which I thought I didn't feel very good about, really. I wanted to pay it back, but I thought like I had hit the lottery or something, And they told me that I sold my integrity a nickel and a dime at a time, and I'd buy it back a nickel and a dime at a time. It was better to make the payments. And, well, it was such a large amount that it was going to be 12 and a half years of payments. When you're a year sober, 12 and a half years of payments is a lifetime. It was overwhelming. And I met they were staying at the Stardust. I met in the coffee shop the day before they left to come back to Pennsylvania. And I proposed my plan, asked my dad if there's anything else. And I told him I wanted to start making payments. And he said to me, Rob, we don't want you to pay the money. He said, we're just delighted that you're sober. This is the first time in years that we had any hope that maybe you're going to be all right. Just keep doing what you're doing and forget about the debt. Wow. Whew. I hit the recovery lottery here, man. 12 and a half years of payments I just got out of. This was very cool. I'm just excited. I'm getting the gift now. I'm on my way to my sponsor's office to tell him the good news. I don't have to pay it back. This is great. I'm thinking about other people I owe. I wonder if I get them to see the light like my dad did. And I walk into the office. I'm on this cloud, man. This is amazing. And I said, I just want to pay my dad. He said I didn't have to pay him. And Dick says to me, it doesn't matter what your dad said. This is your debt. This is your recovery. This is your integrity. You have to pay him. There are times when you got the wrong sponsor. I mean, it's like, what? I mean, I just figured I got a gift from God. He just squashed it, right? And he said, you have to pay this. This is your debt. This is your deal. And I thought, well, I said to him, well, for God's sakes, there's no way to pay it. If I send him this little check every month, he won't even cash it. I don't know what to do. How am I supposed to pay this? And he says this crazy thing. I was just with him last week. He says it to this day. He says it all the time. He just says, I don't know, but a way will be shown. I don't know, but a way will be shown. What does that mean? I mean, for God's sakes. I mean, that's crazy. Well, he was right. I'm working as a cashier in a retail store. Now, in the 70s, and even into the early 80s, there was still a lot of silver coins, wheat pennies, war nickels, silver certificates, and even gold certificates in circulation. And they'd come through my register every day. And my dad had this hobby that he was really into. He'd sit for hours at the kitchen table with the books, and he collected all that stuff. He loved it. And I thought, I'll talk to my boss. I'll see if I could buy this stuff out of the register with the intention of just giving my dad a gift one day. It'd be a nice little thing to give him. Save up, a couple $100,000 worth, $1,000, I don't know, save up something, give it to him as a gift. Well, my boss said it was okay, and I started doing that. And I even changed to a different retail store and did it there. And it was an odd thing. I was chipping away at a couple other men's, and I'm saving these coins. And from the moment I started down that road, it was as if I got lucky. And I started getting raises. I ended up with another company that paid me about twice as much. I started getting bonuses for my performance that were significant. There was a crazy guy in AA, Jack, who had a moving truck, and he used to move furniture, and he would schedule his moves around my times off and give me $100 cash just to help me move furniture for a couple hours. And I found I started saving this stuff. There would be these $100 gold certificates that would come through that register. My boss had put them in his safe for 3-4 weeks till I had enough money to buy them. And I found myself in less than 5 years with the whole amount of the debt in face value. It was unbelievable. I had a shoebox full of silver and gold certificates. I had huge bags of quarters, and I drove back to Pennsylvania with Karen, who was to be the mother of my daughter, and I brought all that stuff to my dad and gave it to him, and it blew his mind. It blew his mind. And up until that, and I want you to understand this. By this time, I'm sober 5 years, I guess, somewhere in there. I'm not good with time. And before I gave those coins and bills to my dad, there was no doubt in my mind that my dad loved me. There was no doubt in my mind that my dad had forgiven me. But there still seemed to me to be something between him and I. Now, I don't know how much of this was on him and how much of it was on me and imagined. To this day, I'm not sure. Maybe it was both. But there seemed to be a little bit of separation. I knew he loved me, but I was like, I was Bob. You know Bob. Got to make allowances for Bob. You know what I mean? My daughter went to a great university. Bob's in a 12-step program. I was like special bus Bob. Now he never said that. But I always felt like he loved me, forgave me, but I never felt like he respected me. When I gave him that money, I felt like I became a man in my Father's eyes. I felt like he respected me. And the time after that we had together was very sweet. He died sometime in that year, right after that. And it was a bittersweet thing. I wished I had more time with him. A lot of the things, the innate values that are in me, I came from him. Even though I resented them as he tried to put them on me as a kid, the honesty and the doing the right thing. And I went back to Pennsylvania when he died, and I was able to be there for my mother and my sister. And it was the weirdest thing. I realized that somehow they were turning to me for support. and the black sheep of the family somehow ended up in the position of being the patriarch, and I don't know how that happened. My mother, right after that, moved to Las Vegas. I introduced her to a guy who I got sober with, George, who was a very active member, went to 2 meetings a day, and no time at all. Her and George are living in sin, which didn't bother me, tweaked my sister a little bit. And it was great. I had the next many years with my mom. She wasn't an alcoholic, but she would go with George to meetings, sometimes once or twice a day. I'd say to the guys I sponsor, for God's sakes, my mom goes to more meetings than you do, and she's not even an alcoholic, for God's sakes. And she got on the board of directors for the TIE club, and I had some great years with her. And then she died when I was about 17, 18 years sober. I'd gotten Clancy a couple years before that as a sponsor, and my mom died. It was very hard, but Alcoholics Anonymous had given me a relationship with her. And you'd given me a sense of the right of what to do and what not to do. And the last year of her, she refused treatment. She had lung cancer and emphysema. And I used to go take care of her. She lived not too far from my office. I'd go over every day. And she was literally, by the time she died, about 50 pounds, I think. I didn't weigh her, but I could lift her up off the bed like that to change the bedding and stuff. And it was a very sad time. But I was so glad to be able to show up for her. I was so grateful to be able to do that. My mom, I was an asthmatic kid. I grew out of it when I started drinking alcohol. True story. But she took care of me hours and hours and hours and hours because I was very sick for a period of time as a kid. And I remember taking care of her and thinking, this is kind of like some form of the 8th and 9th step. I didn't even realize that I had that unfinished business with her until I got to take care of her. And she died and left my sister and I were the only 2 heirs. And she left a will. And in the will, everything was 50-50 between me and my sister. I was actually the executor and was the only other person besides my mom on her safety deposit box. And in that safety deposit box, she had about $270,000 roughly in stocks and bonds and in Naveen and some mutual funds and different things like that. And the day after my mom, or maybe 2 days after, right after my mom died, my sister comes into my office and hands me an envelope with about $300 in it, in these big bills. It was the last of my dad's coin collection, which he gave me when he left me when he died. And it had my name written on the envelope. And my sister says, Mom wanted you to have this, and she wanted me to have everything else. And I just sit there. I don't say nothing. I wanted to say something. I wanted to say, what are you, out of your mind? We have a 50-50. And I didn't say, because that line out of the 12 steps and 12 traditions and in step 10 kept going through my mind. Restraint of tongue and pen, restraint of tongue. I just said something like, really? And she said, yeah, and turned around and walked out of the room. Well, I go crazy. And I talked to some dear friends of mine, guys that were sober 30, 35 years. They all said the same thing. They all said the same thing. Don't let her get away with this. You have a copy of the will. Don't be a doormat. Go get an attorney, etc., etc. I called up Clancy, and his voice was different. I'll tell you something. I think sometimes when one alcoholic's trying to help another alcoholic, somebody else shows up between the two of you. Because he said something to me that nobody else said. And he said to me that if my sister believed she was entitled to all of it, not to fight her and let her have it. And when he said that, there was something inside me that thought, that's right. I didn't like it. I could, and money's not your problem, kid. You got a bad attitude and your something. I gave me one of his little things, But he was right, and I knew it, and I let her have it. And well, here's what happened. This is so weird. As she wanted to transfer all this stuff into her name, all these entities wanted certified copies of the will and death certificates. Well, I am mentioned in the will with my name and address as 50%. So I start getting stock certificates and checks in the mail. And oh my God, I knew God was rewarding me for doing the right thing. This is really very amazing. Oh, thank you, God. I went out. I didn't tell Clancy just yet because, well, you don't really have to talk about the bad stuff, don't you? I think. So I went out and I put down a deposit on a brand new Z Corvette with the fancy wheels and the 20-disc CD player. And I was very excited about that, and then called him up and told him, and he said to me, if, I forget the exact words, but something along the lines like, hey kid, didn't we agree that if your sister believed she was entitled to this, you're going to let her have it? Yeah. And then he's something like, what are you, backdooring her on a technicality? Something like that. He says, do what you said you're going to do. And once again, I have the wrong sponsor. I called my sister up, and after talking to him, and just, to do what you say you're going to do. And, all right, I called her up. I said, Marge, if you still feel the same, that that your mom wanted you to have all that, come on over and I'll sign all this stuff I'm getting over to you. And my sister said to me, she said, Rob, maybe I was wrong. Maybe Mom really wanted you to have half. And I realized that when my mother died, my sister became afraid. Because her whole life, my mom was like a support system for her. If she ever got in trouble, my mom was good for $1,000. And my mom died, and all of a sudden my sister became afraid. And I don't know about you, but I know about me. I get scared enough. I can be very selfish. I can be dishonest. I can lie to you. I may have to make it up later, but you scare me, and I can do all kinds of weird stuff. I think that fear is the muscle of the ego. And my sister became afraid, but without a program, without a sponsor, without anything, just because she's a principled person with a great ethic and a good heart, she came around on her own and ended up with half, without attorney's fees, which is very cool. And if I would have taken her to court, I think I'd have lost my sister. And I think I'd have lost something inside of me, because I would have been making a statement to the universe that money's more important than people or family. And I don't think that would be good for my spiritual condition. And my sister's a great part of my life today. We just do things together. She's helping me redecorate my house. She helped me decorate it before. She is the most amazing aunt for my daughter. And when my sister went through a tough time right after that, she got to come and hang out with her big brother. And I was able to be there for her. If I'd have fought her on that, I wouldn't have been able to be her brother anymore. What a blessing that was. I'll tell you, I think the men's is where we get to change our karma. I never knew what karma meant. I always thought it was like the universe's way of spanking you for being bad or something, And I heard a guy on PBS was giving a lecture, and I just happened to be checking it out, and he said that the literal translation of the word karma from the Hindi into the English would translate as the word doing. And I thought about that, and I thought, that's really right. Why do we all of a sudden, we somewhere on the other side of step 9, our lives change dramatically. It's almost as if our luck changes. And when he said that karma means doing, it's guys like me, I go through life and I have bad luck, and I repeatedly snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory. I mean, I'm that kind of guy. If there's some bad luck to be I'm a magnet for it. And I think what happens is that I can't fool. There's a part of me that I can't fool. I suppress it. But there's a part of me that always knows what I am, that always knows what I've done to other people. Now, I may not want to look at that, and I may not want to face it. I may not want to think about it, and I may sweep it under the rug, but it never goes anywhere. I had a guy not too long ago. He stole a bunch of money, and he said, well, nobody really knows I stole it. I said, listen, the worst person in the world knows that you stole it. The one person that can use it against you, the one person that can sabotage your life over it knows you. And I think that's what happens. It's funny. I am never cognizant of it. I was never consciously aware that I would sabotage my life or position myself to receive bad luck. But it sure seemed like it. Why? And now it's like on this side of the steps and this side of being in Alcoholics Anonymous for a while, it's like I have great luck. I mean, I live in a world that's become very friendly, a world where it's like it's almost as if I need something, just hang out. It's going to show up. I mean, it just works out. I'm not surprised when things happen that are good like that. Sometimes at the last minute, but they always seem to show up. And I think maybe this is really the final deal in me clearing up enough of me to access this thing that most people call God or grace. I don't know. I don't think I have to deserve it. I just think I have to get enough of me out of the way. I'll tell you one more little thing. I saw a movie many years ago. It was one of those old B World War II movies, and it was about the South Pacific during World War II. And there were so many islands in the South Pacific that the United States Armed Services did not have enough troops to garrison, troops on all these little islands, some of these little atolls and things. And so what they would do is throughout the South Pacific, they would parachute in or drop off by boat these observers who would set up these base camps and then watch for Japanese shipping movements and et cetera, et cetera. And this one particular movie was about a guy who parachuted into this island. He said, set up this base camp, and the first part of the movie is him exploring the island and setting up this camp. And then one day he's coming over this sand dune, and he comes in there in this sort of beige type thing is the whole Japanese fleet, and they're coming at him. They're coming towards where he's at. And he panics and he runs back to his camp, and he's trying to get his fleet on the radio. And it doesn't work, and he's shaking it and he's messing with it. He can't get it to work. And he thought, wait a minute. There's a manual. And he reaches down and he starts pulling crap out of this duffel bag. At the very bottom of the duffel bag is this manual. And he pulls the manual out and he starts going through it, and he's finding symptomatic stuff. Check this. He took the back off the radio and he says, try the seating of these tubes and different things. And finally, he repairs the radio, and all of a sudden the fleet's there. And he's able to notify our fleet about the movements of the Japanese fleet, and our guys were able to come in there and I think it was Truck Lagoon, and catch the Japanese fleet unaware. And the problem he was having isn't that our fleet was mad at him, or he'd done something wrong or played with his knobs too much or something. It was not about any of that. He had a broken receiver, and it was his responsibility because no one else would take it to repair the receiver so he could receive the deal. And I think I come here, I think I'm a kid of God's. I'm one of his children. Chamberlain used to say, we either all are or none of us are. I'm one of his kids. He loves me. The problem is I have a broken receiver. And the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, I think, are designed to fix the receiver so I can claim my inheritance.